once believed love could survive anything, even greed. But I was wrong. Daniel wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my world. He spoke of dreams, promises, and forever until money whispered louder. When his company offered him a deal, he chose the cash, not me. He said it was just business, but to me it was betrayal. I watched him trade our love for luxury, leaving me with nothing but memories. Months passed, and I tried to rebuild my life. But then I heard Daniel's empire was crumbling. The same people he trusted had played him. He lost everything. And when he came back to me, he wasn't the man I knew. Regret had carved deep lines on his face. He begged for forgiveness, for a second chance. But some doors, once closed, can never open again. And as he learned, karma doesn't need witnesses. It just waits quietly until the debt is due. It was a chilly evening when Maya first saw Daniel. The city lights flickered through the tall glass windows of the charity gala, painting golden reflections across the marble floor. People laughed over champagne, but Maya stood quietly by the edge of the crowd, her soft smile hiding a lonely calm. Then he appeared, confident, charming, with eyes that seemed to notice her before anyone else did. He walked straight toward her, his voice warm and smooth. "You don't seem like you belong in a place full of masks," he said. She laughed softly, caught off guard. For a moment, the world around her blurred. Their eyes met, and in that instant, something unseen connected them. But what she didn't know was that this meeting wasn't just chance. It was the start of something that would test everything she believed in. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel became the one voice she waited for. Their phone calls stretched into midnight, filled with laughter, secrets, and promises that painted their future in gold. He told her about his dream to build his own company, to prove he could rise above his past. His ambition fascinated her. It was like standing near a flame, dangerous, yet beautiful. Maya felt safe with him, even when his plans sounded too big to touch. Sometimes, though, she noticed something dark flicker in his eyes when he spoke about success, like hunger, not for happiness, but for power. Still, she pushed that thought away, convincing herself it was passion, not pride. And as she fell deeper, she didn't realize the flame she admired was already starting to burn her. One night, under a soft drizzle, they sat by the old bridge near the river. The city's noise faded, leaving only the sound of water and the hum of streetlights. Daniel held her hand tightly and said, "One day we'll have it all. A home, peace, no worries." "I'll make sure of it." His voice trembled slightly, but she didn't notice. She believed him, because in that moment, his eyes looked honest, and his smile felt like truth. Maya whispered back, "I don't need much, Daniel." "Just you." He smiled, but his gaze drifted toward the dark skyline where the city's tallest towers blinked like distant temptations. The rain fell harder, and Maya leaned on his shoulder, unaware that this promise, made in the quiet of love, would someday echo as a curse. Because promises built on dreams are strong, until greed starts whispering in the dark. Nights with Daniel had their own rhythm, the quiet hum of his laptop, the flicker of a single candle, and Maya's soft voice drifting through the room as she read out loud from her favorite books. His small apartment smelled of coffee and wet asphalt from the rain outside, a mix that somehow felt like home. Daniel was obsessed with his plans, scribbled charts, phone calls, and notes scattered everywhere. He spoke of success like it was oxygen. "I'll build something people will never forget," he'd say. Eyes shining like he could already see it. Maya would smile, resting her head on his shoulder, whispering, "You already have everything that matters." But Daniel's mind was far away, in boardrooms he hadn't entered yet, and deals not yet made. She saw it in the way he looked at his reflection, hungry, restless, unsatisfied. Still, she stayed beside him, believing love could fill the spaces ambition left behind. Outside, thunder rolled, quiet, distant. Neither of them noticed. It was the first warning that storms don't always start with rain. Sometimes they start with dreams. Weeks passed, and Daniel's ideas began to take shape. He found partners, pitched his visions, and came home late, smelling of expensive cologne and silent pressure. Maya tried to understand. She made him dinner, waited on the couch, rehearsing things she wanted to tell him, how she missed him, how his absence was starting to feel like a wall. But when he came home, his mind was elsewhere. One night, he dropped a stack of papers on the table, his hands trembling with excitement. "This is it, Maya," he said. "Our future. If this works, we'll never have to struggle again." She smiled weakly, feeling his excitement, but not his joy. The way he said, "our," sounded hollow, like it belonged more to his ambition than to her. Later that night, as he slept, Maya stared at the papers, rows of numbers and unfamiliar names. Something about it felt cold. It wasn't love she saw on those pages. It was risk and hunger and something else she couldn't name. The candlelight flickered over his sleeping face, and for the first time she wondered, was she part of his dream or just a decoration in it? A month later, Daniel took her out to a quiet rooftop dinner, the city glowing below like scattered diamonds. The air was warm, the night soft, and for a moment, it felt like the beginning again. He held her hand and said, "Maya, once this deal goes through, you won't have to work anymore. I'll take care of everything. I promise." His words were tender, but they carried a strange edge, like a gift wrapped in warning. She looked into his eyes and saw something flicker there, a kind of obsession that frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Still, she nodded and smiled, whispering, "I don't need all that, Daniel. I just want you." He laughed softly, brushing his thumb across her hand, but his eyes drifted toward the horizon, toward the tall buildings that shimmered in the distance. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with the hum of the city and the sound of dreams clashing with reality. And as the night wore on, Maya felt something shift, small, quiet, but certain. The man she loved was still beside her, but part of him had already gone somewhere she could never follow. The promise he made that night sounded beautiful. But beauty, she would soon learn, often hides the sharpest edges. The shift began quietly, almost invisibly, like a shadow creeping across sunlight. Daniel's calls grew shorter. His texts came later. The warmth in his voice started to fade, replaced by the sharpness of deadlines and pressure. One evening, he came home later than usual, his suit wrinkled but his eyes burning with excitement. He tossed his phone on the table and said, "Maya, you won't believe this. Someone big just noticed my work." He explained how a powerful investor had seen potential in his startup. The man was known for turning small companies into gold and crushing anyone who got in his way. Maya tried to smile, but something about Daniel's tone made her uneasy. There was greed in his voice, not just ambition, but craving. When she asked, "What's the catch?" he laughed. "There's always a catch, Maya. You just have to be smart enough to beat it." That night, as he spoke on the balcony with the city lights reflecting in his glass of whiskey, she watched from the couch, silent, uneasy. The glow from outside painted him in gold, but behind that gold, there was something darker forming. And in her heart, Maya felt the first chill of something she couldn't yet name, temptation. Days became a blur of phone calls, meetings, and long absences. Daniel was no longer the man who once waited up with her, sharing jokes over cheap pizza and candlelight. Now he was a stranger in a tailored suit, always distracted, always promising just one more week. Maya, then things will settle. But they never did. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night and see him sitting in the living room, the glow of his laptop casting hard lines across his face. He whispered things on the phone, deals, figures, names she didn't recognize. When she asked, "Who are you talking to?" he'd smile faintly and say, "Just business. Go back to sleep." But one night, the tone of his voice changed. It wasn't just business, it was pleading. Maya heard him say, "I'll do whatever it takes. Just give me a chance." Her stomach turned cold. That wasn't the voice of confidence. That was desperation. When he noticed her watching from the doorway, he ended the call and forced a smile. "You shouldn't eavesdrop, Maya?" She wanted to ask what was happening, but his look stopped her, a sharp, cold look she'd never seen before. And as she walked back to bed, she realized something. Daniel wasn't chasing success anymore. He was being chased by it. A week later, Daniel invited her to a restaurant she'd never been to, high above the city, where the walls were glass and the lights below looked like fallen stars. He seemed tense, fidgeting with his watch as they sat. Then a man arrived, older, polished, with a smile that never reached his eyes. He greeted Daniel like a long-lost friend and barely looked at Maya Dot throughout dinner. The man spoke in riddles. "Success requires sacrifice," he said. "You can't win unless you're willing to lose something first." Maya's hands grew cold under the table. The way the man looked at Daniel, it was like watching a spider wrap silk around its prey. Daniel nodded eagerly, agreeing to things she didn't understand. When the man left, Daniel exhaled, his eyes shining with something wild. "This is it," he whispered. "This deal will change everything." But Maya's voice was small when she asked, "At what cost, Daniel?" He didn't answer. He just looked out the window, where lightning cracked across the horizon, lighting up his reflection for a brief, haunting second. And in that flash, she saw it, not love, not excitement, but fear. That night, Daniel signed his first contract with the devil, and he didn't even notice. It started small, barely noticeable at first. Daniel's laughter, once bright and effortless, became rare. The conversations that used to stretch into the night shrank into short replies and distracted nods. The air between them thickened, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Maya would set the table for two, only to eat alone again, staring at the empty chair across from her Dot when Daniel did come home. He smelled of expensive cologne and faint cigarette smoke, scents that didn't belong to him before. She tried to talk, to ask how his day went, but he'd answer without looking up from his phone. "Busy, you know how it is." But she didn't know how it was anymore. He was drifting slowly, quietly, like a ship sailing into fog. One night, as she sat waiting by the window, she saw his car stop at the gate. He didn't come inside right away. He stayed in the car for several minutes, talking to someone on his phone. His smile, faint, secretive, sent a chill through her chest. When he finally entered, she pretended to be asleep. But inside, something inside her cracked open a first seed of doubt, and doubts, once planted, never stopped growing. Maya began to notice things. A perfume on his jacket that wasn't hers. Unknown numbers flashing on his phone. Missed calls he quickly deleted. She told herself she was imagining it, that maybe it was stress or jealousy or both. But the voice inside her grew louder each day. "Something's wrong." When she confronted him, her tone soft but trembling, he didn't even look up. "You're overthinking again, Maya. Don't ruin this with your insecurities," he said. The words stung more than she expected. She wanted to believe him, to trust the man she loved. But his eyes? They weren't the same eyes that once looked at her like she was his whole world. They were colder now, distant, focused on something or someone else. At night, she lay awake listening to the faint hum of his phone vibrating on the nightstand. Once she caught him texting at 2 a.m., turning away so she couldn't see the screen. "Work," he said without looking at her. But his voice cracked, just slightly, enough for her to feel it wasn't the truth. The next morning, Maya found herself staring at her reflection in the mirror, whispering, "When did I start feeling like a stranger in my own love story?" And for the first time, she didn't know if she wanted the answer. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them grew louder than any argument could. Maya started walking in the evenings, long walks through empty streets where the city's noise couldn't drown her thoughts. Every time she returned home, Daniel was either gone or glued to his laptop, his face lit by a blue glow that made him look almost ghost-like. Once, she walked into his office while he was on a call. He froze mid-sentence. His tone changed instantly from charm to caution. When she asked who it was, he smiled that same tired smile and said, "Nothing important." But as she left, she heard his whisper through the crack of the door, "Don't call me when I'm home." That night, she sat by the window, rain tapping softly against the glass. Every drop felt like a countdown to something she couldn't yet see but could feel coming closer. Her eyes fell on the old photograph on the shelf, the two of them, smiling, carefree, hands intertwined. Now those same hands rarely touched Dot in the darkness. She whispered to herself, "If love has a heartbeat, ours is fading." And somewhere outside, thunder rolled, quiet, distant, and final. The days felt colder now, even when the sun shone bright. The air in the house carried a silence that hummed like static, heavy, tense, impossible to escape. Maya had stopped trying to talk. Daniel had stopped trying to listen. He left early, returned late, and whenever she tried to meet his eyes, he looked past her as though she'd become invisible. One afternoon, as she cleaned the living room, she noticed something, a small business card half hidden under the sofa. The name wasn't familiar, but the lipstick stain on the corner of it was. A slow shiver crawled up her spine. She wanted to believe it meant nothing, but her heart already knew it meant everything. That night, Daniel came home humming, his mood strangely light. She wanted to ask him to throw the card on the table and demand the truth, but her throat locked. Instead, she smiled faintly and served him dinner. They ate in silence, every sound amplified. The scrape of forks, the clink of glass, the ticking of the clock. Maya looked at him and realized something terrifying. She didn't recognize the man across from her anymore. And the worst part, he didn't seem to notice she was still there. It happened 3 nights later. Maya couldn't sleep. The wind outside rattled the window frames, and something inside her finally snapped. She walked to Daniel's study, the door slightly open, light spilling through the crack. He was there, whispering into his phone, voice low and careful. "Don't worry, she doesn't know," he said. The words froze her in place. For a moment, her body forgot how to breathe. When he ended the call, she stepped into the room, her voice steady but cold. "Doesn't know what, Daniel?" He turned sharply, eyes wide. Then he laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "Maya, you're overreacting." "It's work." But she didn't move. "Who was it?" she asked again, quieter this time. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You've changed, Maya. You don't trust me anymore." Her eyes filled, but not from weakness, from realization. You made it impossible to trust you, she whispered. The room fell silent, except for the wind howling outside. Then Daniel spoke again, not softly this time. If you can't handle the pressure of what I'm doing, maybe you shouldn't be part of it. His words cut sharper than a knife. She stood there, trembling, heart racing, trying to find the man she fell in love with inside the stranger standing before her. But he was gone, completely dull, and as she left the room, she realized something terrifying. Love doesn't always die quietly. Sometimes it shatters with sound. The next morning, the world felt heavy. Gray sky, cold wind, silence thick as smoke. Maya sat by the window, her suitcase half-packed, her eyes hollow from crying through the night. Daniel hadn't spoken since the argument. He'd just moved around the house like a ghost, avoiding her, avoiding everything. When she finally stood up and said, "I can't live like this," he didn't stop her. He didn't even look up. His silence was her answer. She grabbed her bag, her fingers trembling, and walked to the door. For a moment she waited, hoping he'd call her name, stop her, say something. But all she heard was the faint buzz of his phone and the soft ticking of the clock dot as she stepped outside. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then heavy, washing over her like the truth she'd been avoiding. She walked down the street, heart numb, knowing she wasn't leaving love behind anymore. She was leaving an illusion, and inside that apartment, Daniel poured himself another drink, staring out the window, watching her fade into the distance like a memory he didn't deserve to keep. He thought he had won. He thought he had control, but what neither of them knew was that this was only the beginning, and karma had already started writing the next chapter. The night Maya left, Daniel told himself he felt relieved, but the silence that followed clawed at him. The apartment, once full of her laughter, now echoed with the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of floorboards. He poured another drink, staring at his reflection in the dark window. The city glittered below like scattered coins, each light a reminder of what he still didn't have. When his phone rang, the number was unfamiliar but expected. "Mr. Rhodes?" a smooth voice said. "Are you still interested in our offer?" Daniel hesitated for a second. Then, without thinking, yes. The voice laughed quietly. "Good, because once you sign, there's no turning back." He hung up and stood in the stillness. The sound of rain tapped on the glass, soft and steady, like someone knocking from the other side. For a moment, Daniel thought of Maya, of her scent, her calm, the warmth that used to hold his chaos together. Then he whispered to himself, "I don't need anyone." And that lie settled over the room like fog. 2 days later, Daniel entered the tallest building in the city. The lobby was silent, the marble floor so polished he could see his own uneasy reflection. He was led into a room with no windows, just a long black table and 3 men in suits. Their smiles were thin, their eyes sharper than glass. They spoke numbers that glittered like gold, contracts that promised everything: power, recognition, freedom from failure. The words risk and morality never came up. When Daniel asked what they wanted in return, the oldest man leaned forward and said, "Only your loyalty, nothing more." It sounded simple. Too simple. He read the papers. He hesitated at one clause, something about transfer of liability. The man smiled. "Sign, Mr. Collins, the world doesn't wait for doubt." Daniel's pen trembled before touching the page. The click of it against paper echoed through the room, sharp and final. When it was done, they shook his hand. Their palms were cold. Outside, the sunlight felt weaker than before dawn. By evening, Daniel's bank account overflowed. The numbers glowed on the screen like treasure, intoxicating, almost holy. He laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. He ordered new suits, booked flights, and toasted alone in his dark apartment. But as midnight approached, the thrill began to fade. A headache pulsed behind his eyes, and the shadows on the walls seemed to move when he wasn't looking. He brushed it off, blaming exhaustion, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Then his phone buzzed a message from an unknown number. Enjoy your success. Daniel, remember your promise. His stomach twisted. He scrolled up, searching for earlier messages, but there were none. Just that single line glowing in the dark. He deleted it quickly, forcing a smile. Probably a joke, he muttered, but deep inside, something whispered that every deal has a hidden cost, and his payment had only just begun. Weeks after the deal, Daniel moved into a new apartment high above the city, a sleek glass cage overlooking everything he used to dream of. The view stretched for miles, lights blinking like jewels in a velvet sky. Expensive art lined the walls. The scent of leather and cologne clung to the air. But for all its beauty, it was quiet. Too quiet. He filled his days with meetings, parties, and people who laughed too loud and cared too little. They called him a genius, a success story, the man who turned nothing into everything. Yet every night, when the noise faded, he sat by the window with a drink in his hand and stared at his reflection. Behind the shine in his eyes, there was something hollow. One evening, as he looked down at the city below, he thought he saw a figure standing on the street, someone who looked like Maya. His heart stopped. He blinked, looked again, and the figure was gone. The glass fogged with his breath as he whispered, "She's gone. It's just my mind." But the whisper of guilt was louder than the rain that started to fall outside. Sleep became Daniel's enemy. The more he tried to rest, the more the silence spoke. He began hearing things, soft knocks in the walls, a phone ringing when no one called, faint footsteps across the hall at 3 a.m. At first, he laughed it off, telling himself success came with stress. But the laughter didn't last. That one night, he woke to the sound of his own name. "Daniel!" A voice familiar, female, calm. Maya's voice. He turned on every light, searching, but found nothing except his reflection in the mirror, eyes bloodshot, face pale, sweat dripping down his temple. The voice came again, this time inside his head. "You traded love for money. Now look what you've become." He smashed the mirror, his reflection breaking into shards. Each piece still showed his face, but in every fragment he looked a little less human. As blood trickled from his hand, he whispered, "It's just stress." Just stress? But deep inside, he knew something had followed him since that deal, something invisible. Impatient. Far from Daniel's chaos, Maya's life was slowly mending. She had moved to a smaller town, working at a local art studio surrounded by soft light and quiet music. Her hands, once trembling with heartbreak, now painted again colors full of warmth and healing. People admired her work, not knowing each painting carried a ghost of her past. Yet sometimes, in the stillness of night, she thought of Daniel not with love anymore, but with pity. She remembered his ambition, his restless eyes, the way he looked at the world like it was something to conquer. She wondered if he'd finally found peace, or if the greed that tore them apart had devoured him too. Then one evening, as she was closing the studio, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A message that simply read, "He's not who you think he was. You need to see this." Her fingers froze above the screen. The air felt colder suddenly, the lights flickering once before steadying again. Maya whispered to herself, "What did you do, Daniel?" And as she opened the message, the story she thought was over began again. The night was quiet when Maya opened that message. just the hum of the old ceiling fan and the ticking of the clock on her studio wall. The text contained a single attachment, a photo. Her breath caught when she saw it was Daniel, standing beside three men in black suits, the same men from the gala years ago, but their smiles this time were colder, tighter, rehearsed. Behind them hung a banner of a company name she didn't recognize, Aurelian Partners. Below the photo was a caption, "Do you know who really paid for his success?" Her hands trembled. For months she buried everything about him, sealed those memories under layers of healing. But this image, this simple picture, pulled her back into a world she thought she'd escaped. She tried to delete it, but something stopped her. Curiosity or fear? Because deep down, Maya knew Daniel's rise had been too sudden, too perfect, too clean. And something inside whispered, "You need to know." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low, slow, like a warning. The next day, Maya couldn't focus on her art. Her mind spun in endless circles, the same image flashing behind her eyes. Finally, she sat down at her laptop and typed the company's name into the search bar. Aurelian Partners. At first. Nothing. Then articles started appearing. Half-buried news pieces, missing links, archived forums. Words like fraud, vanished assets, government investigation. The deeper she clicked, the darker it got. Several executives listed in old reports had disappeared, no resignation, no trace. Every record of their clients ended abruptly around the same year Daniel's company had risen to fame. Her chest tightened. She read until the room dimmed with evening light. Then she saw it, a photo in one of the articles. The building where Daniel had signed his deal. Same architecture, same symbol on the door. Maya leaned back, whispering, "Oh my God, it's real." But before she could save the article, her screen flickered once, twice, and the browser shut down. A single pop appeared. "You're looking in the wrong places, Maya." Her blood ran cold. She wasn't alone online. Someone was watching her. Her phone rang that night, a private number. She hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice spoke softly. "You're Maya, right? The girl Daniel left behind?" She froze. "Who are you?" The voice chuckled, low and tired. "Someone who used to work for him. Someone who knows what he traded." Maya's pulse quickened. Traded? For what? The line went silent for a moment. Then the voice whispered, "For you. For money. For power. It's all connected. But you're not safe, Maya. If they know you're digging, they'll come for you too." The call ended with a click. Her heart pounded, the shadows in her apartment seeming to grow taller. Maya stared at her phone, shaking. "What did you do, Daniel?" She whispered again, but this time it wasn't just out of fear. It was anger, because whatever he'd done, it wasn't over yet. Outside her window, headlights slowed. A black car parked across the street, engines still running. Maya stepped back from the glass, heart racing. And in that moment, she knew the past wasn't chasing her. It had already found her. Daniel's mornings had turned into rituals of control. Every curtain drawn, every lock checked twice, every mirror avoided. He told himself it was stress, that success made enemies, that paranoia came with power. But lately, it wasn't just in his head. He began noticing reflections that didn't match his movements. Sometimes, while brushing his teeth, he'd see someone standing behind him, blurred, still, almost human. When he turned, the room was empty, but the air carried the faint smell of burnt paper. One night, his security system pinged, movement detected in his hallway. He checked the cameras. Nothing. Just static. And for half a second, a shape, tall black, featureless, staring directly into the lens. Daniel unplugged everything that night. He sat in the corner of his room with the lights on, whispering to himself that it was all just a trick of the mind. But when dawn came, he found footprints on the floor, muddy, leading toward the balcony door. And the city below was silent, as if holding its breath. Across town, Maya's life had fallen into uneasy routine. Every evening when she left the art studio, a black car sat parked across the street. No driver, no license plate she could clearly read, just the faint shape of someone inside, hidden behind tinted glass. At first, she told herself it was coincidence. But by the third night, the car followed her, through narrow streets, past the bakery, even stopping when she did. She called the police once. They checked, shrugged, found nothing. Probably just a neighbor, they said. But the next morning, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside, a single photograph of her taken through her studio window while she was painting. On the back, 2 words written in shaky ink: "Stop digging." Her hands trembled as she looked around the apartment. Everything felt wrong, too still, too watched. And though she couldn't see anyone, she could feel it, that presence pressing against her skin. Watching, waiting. She whispered into the quiet, "Daniel, what did you drag me into?" Somewhere outside, the car engine started again. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. His phone buzzed. An encrypted message from one of his old business partners. "They're coming for you." The leak was traced. Someone close is looking into Aurelian. Daniel's stomach dropped. He stared at the message, realization dawning like a knife's edge. Someone close. Maya. Without thinking, he called her number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Meanwhile, Maya sat in her dark apartment, her phone vibrating against the table. She hesitated to answer. When she finally picked up, there was no sound. Only breathing. Heavy, familiar. Then Daniel's voice broke through, low, urgent, trembling. "Maya, you need to leave town." Now, before she could speak, the line cut. A faint click echoed, not from the phone, but from somewhere in her apartment. Her heart stopped. She turned slowly toward the door. It was already open. The door stood half open, swaying slightly, as if someone had just left or just entered. Maya froze, her heartbeat pounding in her ears, louder than the wind outside. Every instinct screamed to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The smell hit her next, faint, metallic, like rust or old blood. The kind of scent that doesn't belong in a place you call home. She reached for her phone, but her hand was trembling so badly it nearly slipped from her grasp. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice so small it barely carried beyond the doorway. No answer, just the creak of wood and a soft thud from the kitchen. Slowly, she took a step forward. The lights flickered. Shadows swam across the walls like smoke. When she reached the kitchen, she found her sketchbook open on the counter, the pages torn, black ink smeared over her drawings. On one page, written over her own artwork in crooked letters, were 3 words: "He can't hide." Her throat went dry. She backed away, hands shaking. But before she could turn, a whisper drifted from the hallway. Low, hoarse, almost human. "Maya?" She spun around. Nothing, only the dark stretch of the corridor leading to her bedroom. Her breath hitched. The sound came again, the slow, uneven drag of footsteps on the floorboards. Her mind screamed to run, but her body betrayed her. She stood frozen, watching the shadow crawl toward her. The door to her bedroom creaked open on its own. Inside, the air grew heavier, thick, almost wet, like the room itself was holding its breath. She flicked on the light. The bulb buzzed, dimmed, then steadied. Her clothes lay scattered, drawers open. But what caught her eye was the mirror on the wall, cracked, and written across the glass in the same messy scrawl, "He sold his soul." Tears welled in her eyes. "Daniel," she whispered. It was no longer just fear. It was realization. Something about his deal, something wrong, something dark, had followed him. And now it had found her too. From the broken mirror, her reflection blinked. Half a second later than she did, Maya stumbled back into the living room, heart racing. She grabbed her phone, hands slippery with sweat, and dialed Daniel again. This time, he answered immediately. "Maya, are you safe?" His voice was sharp, frantic, different. "Someone's in my apartment," she whispered. "They know about your deal. They know everything." The line crackled, voices overlapping faintly. A second whisper behind Daniel's words. Low and inhuman, Mia, he said. "You need to listen. Whatever's happening, it's not just business. It's static." Then silence. Her phone screen went black, and from behind her, the television flickered on by itself. Snowy static filled the room. Then an image appeared, grainy, distorted. Daniel's face, staring straight at her. His lips moved slowly, out of sync with the sound. "Maya, it's coming for both of us." The TV clicked off. The apartment fell into dead silence. Outside, thunder cracked so loud it shook the windows. And for the first time, Maya realized the watchers weren't just watching anymore. They were inside. Daniel hadn't left his penthouse for days. The curtains stayed shut. The air smelled of whiskey and sleepless nights. Every screen in the room hummed with static, the sound he now hated more than silence. Sometimes faces formed in the static, half-shapes, mouths whispering his name before fading again. He tore the plugs from the walls, but the noise kept returning. Like the city itself was breathing through his floor. He tried to call the partners who'd signed the contract with him, but none of the numbers worked anymore. Every email bounced back. When he checked his company's account, the balance was empty. Millions gone. A single line replaced the ledger. Balance settled. He laughed, the kind of laugh that sounds like breaking glass. He had wanted power. Now he owned nothing but ghosts. And in the corner of the room, the shadows seemed to watch. Patient as predators, Maya packed a single bag and left her apartment before sunrise. She couldn't stay, not with the writing on her walls, not with the smell of something rotting that no one else could sense. She took the first train back to the city she'd sworn she'd never return to. Outside the window, the dawn light looked gray and thin. Each tunnel they passed through felt longer, darker, like the train was diving underground into something ancient. Her phone buzzed once with an unknown text. "He'll need you before the end." Her stomach tightened. She didn't reply. When the train surfaced again, the skyline of Daniel's city waited tall, gleaming and strangely lifeless. She told herself she was coming for answers. But somewhere deep inside, she knew she was walking back into the storm. Daniel finally left his apartment the night Maya arrived. Rain fell in thin silver lines, hissing against the pavement. He walked with his coat collar high, trying to drown out the whispers that had begun following him through every crowd. When he reached the cafe where they had first met years ago, he saw her sitting by the window, eating. For a moment, he thought she was another vision until she looked up. Her eyes were tired but steady. "Daniel," she said softly, "what did you sign?" He swallowed hard. A deal that fixed everything and ruined everything else. Lightning flashed. Their reflections overlapped in the glass. Two people blurred into one broken outline. Then the lights in the cafe flickered. The hum of electricity deepened to a growl. And from outside, across the wet street, figures began to gather still, dark, watching. Maya gripped his hand. "They followed us," she whispered. Daniel looked toward the window, voice trembling. "No, Maya." They never left. The city felt different when Maya stepped back onto its streets. The buildings leaned closer, windows shining like eyes. Every gust of wind carried whispers, half words, half breath. Daniel walked beside her, silent. He hadn't slept in days. His face looked drawn, his voice flat. Every corner they passed seemed familiar, though neither of them could say why. They followed the address from Daniel's contract to an old district by the river. The glass towers ended there. Only brick walls and flickering lamps remained. At the end of a narrow alley, they found a door marked with the same symbol from the Aurelian contract, a circle carved around an open hand. When Maya touched the symbol, it felt warm. "This is where it started," Daniel whispered. Thunder rolled above them. Something behind the door sidelong and low like the building itself had been waiting for them to come back. Inside, dust floated through the air in slow spirals. The corridors stretched farther than they should have, lined with mirrors so old they reflected nothing clearly. Each mirror shimmered faintly, showing flashes of other rooms, other times. In one reflection, Daniel saw himself signing the deal again. Pen pressed hard, eyes empty. In another, Maya saw herself crying on that bridge, years ago, whispering promises she no longer believed. At the center of the hall stood a single table with an open ledger. The pages moved on their own, flipping until they stopped on two names, Daniel Collins, and written newly below it, Maya Reed. Maya's voice broke. "Why is my name there?" Daniel shook his head, but his eyes filled with guilt. "Because I offered everything I had to buy my future," he said slowly. "And the only thing I had left was you." The air turned colder, lights dimming until only their breathing could be heard. Then the mirrors began to hum soft at first, then louder. Like voices building into a single low chant, they turned toward the sound. From the farthest mirror, a figure stepped forward tall, dressed in black, its face smooth and pale like melted glass. The air rippled around it. Every mirror reflected the same shape, repeating endlessly. It spoke with Daniel's own voice. A debt must be paid. You traded love for gain. The balance has returned. Maya grabbed Daniel's arm. "We can undo it," she said. "We can break the contract." But the figure tilted its head, almost amused. "There is no undoing what was willingly signed." The floor shuddered. Cracks spread like veins through the stone. Daniel fell to his knees. "Then take me," he shouted. "Leave her out of this." The figure paused, then whispered, "You never understood. The moment you wrote her name, she became part of the cost." The lights burst, glass raining down around them. When the glow faded, the hall was empty. Only Daniel and Maya remained, surrounded by broken reflections. In each shard, they saw themselves not as they were, but as they might become, and the echo that filled the silence was neither human nor gone. The room had gone still. The broken mirrors surrounded Daniel and Maya like frozen waves, each one reflecting their faces from 100 different angles. Every version of Daniel looked slightly different, one smiling, one crying, one hollow-eyed and lost. He couldn't tell which reflection was real anymore. Maya touched one of the mirror shards gently. "We can still fix this," she whispered, but even her voice trembled. Daniel's hands shook. "You don't understand," he said. "Every promise I made, every dream I chased, it was built on a lie. The floor pulsed beneath their feet like a heartbeat. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Daniel took a step toward the largest mirror. Inside, his reflection began to move on its own, lifting its hand, pointing straight at him. Then, in a voice just like his own, it said, "You can't erase what you traded." Maya grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. "Then we find another way," she said firmly. "We face it together." But Daniel's reflection smiled, not cruelly but sadly. Together was the price. The building began to tremble, as if the air itself was breaking apart. The lights overhead flickered, throwing their shadows across the walls like fleeing ghosts. Maya pulled Daniel toward the door, but it had vanished, replaced by endless glass. Mirrors stretching in every direction. Each reflection showed moments from their past. The gala where they met. The bridge where he made his promise. The night he signed his deal. And in every reflection, something invisible lurked behind them, a faint silhouette, like the shadow of a debt collector waiting to be paid. Daniel clutched his chest, gasping. "It's taking everything back," he said. "Every piece of what I built." Maya turned to him, desperate. "Then let it take the lies, not the truth. You still have a heart, Daniel. Use it before it's gone." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time since the day she left. "Maya," he whispered. "I'm sorry." The tremor stopped. The mirrors went silent. And for a breathless second, the room felt calm. The silence deepened until even their breathing sounded loud. In the largest mirror, the reflection of Daniel stepped closer, its expression now calm, almost human. "A balance can't be destroyed," it said softly. "But it can be shifted." Maya frowned. "Shifted? One must carry what the other cannot." Daniel understood before she did. He turned to Maya, his eyes wet but clear. "If one of us stays," he said quietly, "the other can leave." She shook her head. "No, there has to be another way." But Daniel was already moving toward the mirror, toward the faint light that pulsed behind it like a heartbeat. "Maya, you gave me love when I didn't deserve it," he said. "Now let me give you something back." She grabbed his hand, tears spilling down her face. "Daniel, don't, please." He smiled faintly. "It's not punishment anymore. It's peace." Then, without another word, he stepped forward. The mirror rippled like water, swallowing him in a single wave of silver light. The tremor stopped. The hall grew still. The mirrors, one by one, began to fade until only Maya remained standing in quiet light, holding her breath in the echo of his name. Behind her, the largest mirror cracked once more, then stilled. And from its reflection, a faint whisper drifted. "Debt paid." For a long time, Maya couldn't move. The room that had once felt alive now stood still, cold, colorless, empty. The mirrors had lost their glow. They were just glass again, cracked and dull. She stood in the center, surrounded by fragments of reflection, her heartbeat echoing through the hollow air. Dust shimmered where the last light fell, soft and golden like the first trace of morning. Daniel's voice no longer filled the space, but something about the silence felt gentle, as if the anger, the hunger of the place had finally been satisfied. Maya took one step forward. Her foot brushed against something on the floor, a small folded page from the ledger, burnt around the edges. It carried only 3 words, written in Daniel's handwriting: "Keep your promise." She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, not from fear, but release. Outside, thunder faded into rain. The storm was ending. Maya stepped out into the street. The city felt lighter, the same buildings stood, but the shadows seemed thinner, the air easier to breathe. Raindrops clung to her hair and clothes, but she didn't mind. Each one felt like a reminder that she was still here. She passed the same alleyway where they had first entered, now empty. No door, no symbol, no trace that anything had ever existed there. For a moment, she thought she heard a faint hum, the same low tone from the mirrors, but this time it wasn't menacing. It sounded like a distant lullaby. She walked toward the river where the skyline shimmered in reflection. The lights of the city rippled softly, and she could almost see Daniel standing there, not as he was, but as she remembered him before the greed, before the deal. Smiling Dot, she whispered into the rain, "You kept your word." And the wind moved gently. Like a quiet nod in reply, Dot, by the time the sun rose, the world had changed again. Maya sat on a bench near the bridge, the same bridge where they once made their promise. The golden light stretched across the water, washing everything in calm color. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket, smoothing it against her knee. "Keep your promise." It wasn't just a message, it was a reminder. A second chance. She decided then that Daniel's sacrifice wouldn't end with silence. She would tell a story not of wealth or downfall, but of redemption. Because sometimes the truest kind of justice isn't revenge or punishment. It's forgiveness. Dot, as she looked toward the horizon, a soft warmth touched her cheek, sunlight breaking through the clouds. For the first time in years, Maya smiled. And though she couldn't see him, she knew Daniel had finally found peace. Weeks had passed since that night. Maya returned to her small apartment, but she found it hard to feel at home. Everything reminded her of Daniel. His old jacket still hanging by the door, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air. The city had returned to its rhythm, but inside her, something had shifted. One afternoon, she decided to visit Daniel's old office, the one he had rented when his company was at its peak. The building was being emptied. Movers carried boxes and furniture through the lobby. When she entered, the air was thick with dust and memory. His desk still sat in the corner, untouched, a single drawer slightly open. She hesitated, then pulled it out completely. Inside was a worn leather folder, the same one Daniel used for his contracts. Her hands trembled as she opened it. There, resting neatly inside, was the ledger. Only this time it was blank, except for one final page. Maya unfolded the page carefully. It wasn't typed. It wasn't cold or businesslike. It was handwritten, the ink slightly faded, but unmistakably Daniel's. "If you're reading this, it means the deal is over. I thought money could fill the silence I carried inside me, but all it did was make it louder. You once told me love doesn't disappear. It waits. Maybe that's what redemption is, not escape, but understanding. I couldn't change what I did, Maya, but I could make sure you'd never pay for it. Whatever I owed, it's done now. Live free of it." Her eyes blurred as she read the words over and over. The ledger pages began to turn on their own, slow and silent, one after another, until the last one closed with a gentle thud. When she looked again, the folder was gone. Only a small wisp of light floated where it had been. Like the last breath of a candle before it fades, Maya left the office and walked outside into the morning air. The sky was clearer, painted with soft gold and pale blue. The city moved beneath her, cars, people, the rhythm of ordinary life. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel haunted. She felt grounded, fragile, but real. The deal, the curse, the guilt, all of it had dissolved into something simpler. A story of love, loss, and balance. As she crossed the street, a gentle wind brushed past her. She turned, half expecting to see Daniel. Of course, no one was there, only sunlight on the glass windows, glinting faintly like the old mirrors. She smiled quietly. "Goodbye, Daniel," she whispered. Debt paid. Promise kept. And as she walked away, a single feather drifted down from above, landing softly on the pavement beside her. Light, weightless, a silent sign that some debts aren't about money, they're about the heart. In the end, Daniel's story became a quiet whisper of regret, a warning echoing through empty halls he once called success. Maya never wished him harm. She just let life do what it does best, balance the scales. She moved forward, stronger, wiser, untouched by bitterness. And Daniel? He learned that the cost of greed isn't always paid in dollars. Sometimes it's paid in sleepless nights, haunting memories, and the echo of a love that could have been. Because in life, money may open doors, but only love keeps them from